Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this roundtable discussion on really leaving no one behind. My name is Ignacio Saiz. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Economic and Social Rights. CESR is an international NGO which has been campaigning actively to secure human rights for all on the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda. Our organization is also co-convener of the Human Rights Post-2015 Caucus, which is a broad coalition of human rights organizations and activists worldwide who are engaged in the post-2015 process. Human rights and equality were two of the biggest blind spots of the MDG agenda. The Millennium Declaration, from which the goals were drawn, did reaffirm the commitment of member states to strive for the full protection of human rights, and they included a particular focus on the rights of women, migrants, minorities, and other disadvantaged groups who are often left out of the development process. But in practice, as we all know, the goals and targets which were agreed in 2001 fell short of existing human rights commitments. Critically important human rights issues, from the right to social security and decent work to freedom of expression and information, were left out of the agenda, either because they were seen as too controversial, they were seen as irrelevant to development, or they were seen as unmeasurable and therefore not amenable to the kind of commitments, framework of commitments in the MDGs. The MDGs set goals and targets for countries and populations as a whole, ignoring the disparities faced in every country by women, by people with disabilities, by indigenous peoples, by older persons, and by other disadvantaged groups. And the reason why the goals were insensitive to issues of inequality was because the process for devising them didn't include the perspectives of communities facing deprivation and discrimination on a daily basis. Fortunately, a lot has changed since then. The current process to agree a new set of sustainable development goals has been a real opportunity to remedy these shortfalls. The human rights community has been campaigning to spell out what it means in practice to anchor the new framework in human rights principles of universality, indivisibility of rights, equality, accountability, and participation. Our Human Rights Caucus, that I mentioned earlier, has produced a litmus test for assessing the outcomes and the proposals currently on the table. And I would urge you, we've brought copies, I would urge you to have a look at this before you leave. Activists working for the human rights of women, indigenous peoples, older persons, young people, LGBT community, and others have organized and fought hard for inclusion in this process in a very meaningful manner, both in terms of content and process. And as a result, we now have a draft SDG document which is light years ahead of the MDGs in terms of human rights and equality. Nevertheless, as I'm sure all of you will put your hand up to say, there are serious challenges that remain on the table. Some aspects of the human rights agenda remain very contested, including civil and political rights issues, sexual and reproductive rights, and many other human rights issues. Accountability is still a problem, particularly the accountability of wealthy states or wealthier states under a universal agenda. Commitments to economic inequality, to tackling economic inequality, and to women's sexual and reproductive rights still hang in the balance. And participation is still an issue. Those of us in civil society who have been active in this issue are facing that it's a continual uphill struggle to be meaningfully involved, not just to have a voice as we have here, but to be heard, for that voice to be heard by decision makers, including member states. And there are concerns also around implementation and monitoring and accountability and measurement of metrics of progress around the issues that we work on here. So this roundtable will do a number of things. It will assess the progress that has been made in making the Sustainable Development Agenda more inclusive of the human rights of all people. Secondly, we will aim to identify some key outstanding concerns and challenges. And thirdly, we will try and propose strategies, or at least ideas, to ensure that these concerns are addressed going forward. Particularly, this is a critical stage in the process as the content of the SDGs is now about to be negotiated on and finalized, and mechanisms will be created for monitoring, accountability, and participatory implementation. So this is a critical time for this discussion. Now, we have a wonderful panel of speakers to help us with this task. We have Violet Shivutse, who is coordinator and founder of the Shibuya Community Health Workers in Kenya, on my right there. We have Ahmed Al-Hindawi, who is United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, to her left. We have Anna Porta from the Mission of the Netherlands, representing a governmental perspective. To my left, we have Dan Foster, not David Foster, as he is on some of the materials that you've seen. His name is Dan, who is Senior Counsel at Lawyers Without Borders. We have Marianne Diamond, who is Chair of the International Disability Alliance. And finally, to my extreme left, if I can say, is Jane Stewart from the International Labour Organization. I'll say a little bit more about them when I call on them to speak. But I want to invite, first of all, Violet Shivutse to give us her perspective on progress, challenges, and strategies. Violet is leads, as I mentioned, the Shibuya Community Health Workers in Kenya, which is a grassroots, women-led, community-based organization. She's worked on HIV as a community organizer, organizing 2,000 grassroots women working as caregivers on HIV and their affected families, and also addressing issues of women's land rights and poverty. So eminently well placed to tell us what progress and challenges there are with regard to the inclusion of women's rights and women's participation in this process. Violet.
Thank you so much. I think as a grassroots woman leader in my community, I would start by appreciating the efforts that has been put during this process, particularly the Open Working Group, which actually was very interactive, and it brought the civil society and the stakeholders together in a very interactive spirit to actually lead this process or be completely part of this process. And I think this is the spirit that the SDGs, for me, is actually being rooted upon, where there is supposed to be inclusion of all stakeholders. My wish is, if this is the spirit that we are going to continue in, from even up to the summit, so that we continue seeing inclusion and no one is left behind, as the session is saying. Speaking as a grassroots woman leader, it's just that all of us have to be very careful, because the moment we talk about inclusion, it is so easy to leave grassroots women and communities behind, because it reaches a moment where large NGOs take the space, and sometimes they don't have the realistic issues, they don't understand the realistic issues like the grassroots women and the communities where we live in. So there has to be a deliberate effort which actually signals people to remember that the poor people's organizations have to be on the table. I come from a movement that brings together 3 organizations: Wairu Commission, Shark Slum Dwellers International, and Women in Informal Working. And these organizations have, for a long time, more than 25 years, been organizing to bring grassroots women and communities to the table to be able to bring their voices, because the voices of the communities are usually forgotten. And from our experience, we have indeed seen that in most of the development agendas, there is a belief that, a myth that grassroots women and communities are fragmented, so we don't have a constituency that makes us engage effectively. But I think in this important session, what I want to say is we have organized, and we are organized around communities, we are organized across countries, across regions, and we are actually able to bring our voices in the table of decision making in a more organized way. And we have actually been playing a key role as grassroots organizations, poor people's organizations in this process, because what we do in such a meetings, because we work and live in the rural communities, in the poor urban settlements, we have been taking this information and including people to be able to bring their voices and help to shape what the message that we want to bring to the table. So what I want to say is that this language where we call women that women are vulnerable, are target groups, I think does not actually help in how we want to make inclusiveness and to ensure that they are participating in the table of decision making. My plea is, how can we actually come up with a way that would make the decision making roles of communities of grassroots women to be institutionalized, so that we are not just left at implementation. We are also recognized at the table of policy making and be able to be part of the planning. The other thing that the Sustainable Development Goals process has to be keen to bring in women is during the drafting of indicators. For sure, if we sit in meetings here and think of indicators that are going to tell how people's lives are going to improve without bringing poor people's organizations, we are going to get it wrong. There should be a way that we are going to be part of developing the indicators that are going to tell what is sustainable development, how are poor people's lives going to improve. In the document that I've been looking in, there is a lot of women reproductive rights. It's actually a need, but for sure, our rights do not just stop at reproductive. Our rights should go up to rights to own land and control, rights to access basic service, because that is what we have been crying for, and that has been the issue in our day-to-day fight. So when we are talking about the rights and we are just stopping at women reproductive rights, I think it becomes a challenge. The other thing that I want to say is that, I was looking at the goal 16.7, which is saying ensure responsive inclusion and inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels. It stops at all levels, and it doesn't actually speak out to who are going to be the stakeholders in this decision-making, unless it points out governments, communities, people that are living in poverty, then we will forget them. So for me, this is but what I'm just bringing to the table is that we need to actually institutionalize the roles of grassroots women and poor people to be able to be part of the planning, monitoring, and implementation of this process to get its reality. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I was thanking Violet for stressing the need to have the perspective of and voice of those experiencing poverty and deprivation at the grassroots level, really informing decisions around the content and the process and the monitoring and implementation. You know, this again, the MDGs were an expert-led, technocrat-led process. And the real expertise resides in the people who have to face poverty and injustice on a day-to-day basis. It's that experiential expertise that needs to be valued in this process. Thank you, Violet. I'm now going to call on Marianne. I'm going to chop things up a bit. We're not going to go right to left. Marianne is the current chair of the International Disability Alliance, IDA. IDA is a network of 7 global and 4 regional organizations of persons with disabilities and their families, representing the estimated 1 billion persons with disabilities worldwide. IDA acts as an authoritative and representative voice of persons with disabilities here at the UN system, advocating to advance human rights using the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities approved just some years ago. Marianne, in her day job, leads Vision Australia's Advocacy and Engagement Department. So Marianne, tell us from your perspective in terms of the rights of people with disabilities, what progress, what challenges and what ideas are there for taking this vision forward?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. As we've just heard, the persons with disabilities is a large number of people. 1 billion persons live with disabilities, 15% of the world's population. And yet, in the Millennium Development Goals, we were not mentioned. And although it might have been intended that goals and targets were set for everybody, our experience is if you weren't named, you were not counted. And, you know, we heard here, even yesterday, great numbers of, for example, numbers of children who now go to school that didn't previously. Let me tell you, that is not the case for children with disabilities. So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was a very important tool adopted in 2007. And large numbers of countries have ratified and are now putting into force that convention. And certainly there has been great progress. We've often heard the motto, nothing about us without us, and we've made it our business to use that motto in all of our work. And I think we have been building on that momentum over the last 7 years with 3 years of tireless effort working with member states as leading up to the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals. We have visited every member state multiple times, putting the case of persons with disabilities, explaining why it is so important for disability to be considered in all of the goals and targets and indicators. And in the final outcome document, disability is there 9 times. That is kind of, we think, very good progress for disability. But we are not foolish. We know that things change and they change quickly. And I heard yesterday from the Indigenous community that at one point they had 9 references and in the June version they had almost nothing. So we know things can change, so we're not complacent. So I think we are very keen on that if we are going to have an effective, successful framework of the development agenda, it must include everyone, and it must be based on the principles of the CRPD, and that is mainstream inclusive development for persons with disabilities and for everyone. Certainly, equity and inclusion to us are the principles of which the framework should be based. So we want in persons with disabilities to enjoy the growth and opportunities that we hope for everybody. Employment is a huge issue for persons with disabilities. Opportunity to find work, and we'll hear from Jane about work, so I won't focus on that, but also poverty and disability go hand in hand. And if we can get children into school, get them educated, they find jobs, we make choices in life, all of us as persons in the community, and persons with disabilities need to enjoy that same rights as everyone else. 80% of persons with disabilities live in the developing world. So we have a huge piece of work to do as a global community to change the lives of those people, to avoid the situation of them becoming isolated and entrenched in poverty. So my message really is that we need to be based on equality and inclusion. As far as what I think some of the challenges are, we would like to see our 9 references of disability stay in the document and make it through to the end in the goals, targets and indicators. We believe that civil society needs to work collaboratively and work together to support each other and support all of the requirements that we wish and have and are there now. Because if we want to have no one left behind, we cannot leave 15% of the population out, is our view, but I know there's other groups with similar positions. Certainly we need to become involved in the next stages. There's other things that happen alongside just this document, the finance discussions and negotiations, because this program will have to be financed. And we need to ensure that we are part of those conversations as well as just the goals and targets and indicators. We need also to work in partnership. That is member states, civil society, the private sector. If we're going to be successful, we need to work in partnership and we need to work collaboratively. We need to respect the views of others and listen to them and understand them. And from my point of view, the other thing is that we need to continue to work with member states to ensure that in their policies, programs, all of the work they do, monitoring, evaluation and so on, that persons with disabilities are empowered to take part in those conversations. Many times in my experience, governments talk to me about how disability organisations don't tell them disability is a priority. And, you know, my response often is, well, maybe they need some assistance to build the capacity to know how to talk to government, because often that is one of the problems. So, so moving forward, I think partnerships is really important, working in the other areas of the negotiations, such as the finance and implementation, because we would like to see the persons impacted by the new program being part of the discussions of implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and we need to work together with private sector, civil society and UN and member states. Just before I close, I had forgotten to say one of the greatest progresses for us was the inclusion in our 9 references of the disaggregation of data. Many times we come across situations where governments will say, well, how do you know this is a problem? Show me the data. And I think that disaggregation of data is one of the key things that is going to be very important in the successful implementation of this framework. I will stop now and leave it to my other colleagues to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. You know, if the current draft has 9 references to the rights of people with disabilities, it's a real credit to coalitions like IDA, IDDC and others who've been it's really been a model of organizing in terms of how disability rights activists have fought for inclusion this time around. And thank you also for reminding us that this may be the high watermark in this process. We cannot be complacent. There are gains now in the SDG outcome document, but this is a year of negotiation when things are going to get traded off in a very sordid manner by member states, and yielding to different pressures and different interests. So vigilance is the key word. I think you're reminding us that we have to defend the gains in a way, as well as pushing further if possible. So thank you, Marianne. I'm now going to call on Ahmed Al-Hindawi, who, as I mentioned, is the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. He's been a youth advocate at the national, regional and international levels. He was co-founder of Youth for Democracy Network at the Jordanian Commission for Democratic Culture, which he headed. Internationally, he's a co-founder of the International Youth Council based here in New York, and has played a key role for other organizations, particularly in the Arab region, in the Middle East region, or in the Arab world, on youth issues. A CV too long and illustrious to mention in detail. Yeah. So Ahmed, tell us from your perspective what the gains have been and what the challenges are from the perspective of the rights of young people.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here and to join this panel to talk about the issues of youth rights. I was thinking about how to start this, talking about the channel of challenges facing young people around the world. I could not think of a better person than a person that was probably not famous for you, but is turning 80 years old this year. His name is Dimitro Mazzallo, and usually I'm called as the first ever envoy in youth. And I would like to acknowledge this man who, back in 1985, he was appointed as a special rapporteur for the rights of young people at the United Nations, and he offered one of the most important documents talking about youth rights and describing whether there is a need for new rights for young people, or we should talk about the systematic exclusion for young people from accessing their rights, basically. And I think he's turning 80 years old, and I think he would be pleased to know that we're still following his steps and his work, and we'll continue the struggle, I would say, for ensuring full access for young people to enjoy their rights. I am a firm believer of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In fact, it's amazing because this document is probably the only document that I read in my life, and I don't disagree with a single word written on it. Read it over and over. I can't disagree with any single word. That's amazing. It's a human-made document that I can't disagree with. And this, it just shows the evolvement of humanity after thousands and thousands of years to come to a point where we talk about universal values, we talk about Universal Declaration for Human Rights, and we take things for granted today, that there's mechanisms, there are Universal Declaration for Human Rights. Just if you were on this planet 100 years ago, there's none of that, basically. You can't basically argue based on a human rights-based approach. Doesn't mean that these rights didn't exist before, of course, but I think they were never this much elaborated and protected, and there are mechanisms to do this. Of course, the great thing about the Universal Declaration for Human Rights is that it gives right to everyone, including young people. Well, the challenge that not everybody can enjoy them. And that's clear if you look around the world. There are burning fires everywhere, and there are many people around the world who cannot enjoy even their basic rights. Among them are young people, of course. To think about some of the challenges we face today in relation to the post-2015 development agenda. First, I have to say that the outcome document of the system, the open working group, which was truly open, is impressive if you compare it to any other drafts that were circulated before. And we have something to celebrate, at least for a second, and to think about how we can keep it, and maybe how we could even encourage member states to walk the extra mile. When it comes to youth issues, I've been coordinating a network of 1,700 youth organizations from all over the world. We crowdsource youth targets in post-2015 over 6 months. Many UN agencies joined us, youth organization, and we produced a document that if you have your mobile with you, I encourage you just to write in Google search, Global Youth Call. Global Youth Call is the first comes in any search engine, and you'll find the Global Youth Call, which is the results of hundreds of youth meetings around the world. Consolidated document talking about what youth targets or youth-related targets should be in the post-2015 development agenda. And we came to a point where many of these points were mentioned in the post-2015, or in the, I would say in the open working group outcome document, the proposed sustainable development goals. Now, if you look to some of the challenges facing young people in accessing their rights, let's pick one thematic area, for example. Talk about employment. We talk about 75 million young persons who are unemployed in our world today. Actually, they are not only unemployed, they are not even in education or training. I am not one of these extremists who start bringing and counting young people as of 15. They are not unemployed. I don't expect young people who are 15 years old to be employed. I think they should be in school or in training. But if 15 to 24 years old, they are not in education or training or employment, and there are 75 million of them around the world, there's a serious issue here. If there are 58 million kids, 5 to 9 years old, they are still out of school, there's a serious issue here. And we should outline this and make it a center stage, basically, to any development agenda that is coming to talk about development for the next 15 years. Think about it, half of the world population under 25 years of age. And for me, it's not like I don't want to make the case for youth in post-2015, but I think it's a common sense and simple math. This is the demographic of our world today. There are issues of aging, there are issues of youth demographic culture around the world, and we have to consider that. 670 million jobs needed in the next 15 years. Some are saying over 600 million jobs. And who can create this number if we don't put this demographic fact at the center of our planning? Think about participation. Do you know, I mean, in some countries, to establish or to form youth organization, you have to be over 30 years old. Half of the world population under 25 years of age, and less than 1%, not even 1%, less than 1% of MPs, parliamentarians around the world, under the age of 30. Less than 6% of all parliamentarians around the world under the age of 35. And again, you ask why young people are not interested in politics. In fact, they are interested in politics. If you open social media today, most of my friends are debating political issues. But they don't go to the election day and they don't join political parties. Because for them, there's a huge shift is happening around us. And we don't want to admit it sometimes. For anything to be relevant in the future, you have to talk to young people. And you have to read this dynamism that's happening in social networks and to read the new trends. Sometimes it seems to me that everything in the world is becoming digital. And the only thing that has remained analog is politics. And then you blame young people why they are not joining politics. They can vote for American Idol here, and they have to wait 5 hours in a line to vote for a political candidate. And you think this is silly? You think this is innovative? This is happening without describing it. This is happening, and you have to catch up. And that's part of our collective efforts within organizational governments. That's too big. Peace and security, another area to talk about youth rights in post-2015. Who are the most to suffer in peace and, basically in conflicts around the world? Among the most to suffer are young people. And they're most often portrayed somehow as the perpetrators of conflicts. They are the one carrying guns, and they are the one you see them on TV burning flags and doing all this and that. But have you ever seen a young person invited to a peace talk? They are not mature enough to know what we're talking about. But they can send them to the forefronts of conflicts, and they can pay the price, they can be deployed and become radical, but they are not, mature enough to be invited to peace talks, basically. And I can't even think about a peace delegation where they bring young people part of that delegation to sit and negotiate. Let alone, the talk about climate change. And with the climate change, that's another debate. Talk about the generations who are going to suffer the most from this, and the future generations, who are going to suffer from the fact that this planet is not sustainable. And yet, young people are struggling to make their voice heard. In fact, this morning, I went to Columbia University to meet an international group of students who are coming here to think about how they can influence the climate change negotiation globally. So the commitment is there. I think we need to open a little bit more. That's why the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, he defined leaders for his climate summit this September as young leaders, civil society leaders, private sector leaders. Everyone should be part of this. So I think we have something to take now, the outcome document of the sustainable, the open working group for the SDGs, and we need to strengthen that one. And for me, there is no development whatsoever without talking about the human rights and to ground it in human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmad. You said that you didn't want to make the case for a focus on youth post-2015, but I think you just did so very eloquently. And for reminding us that not just because of demographic changes is it indispensable to look at the rights of young people, but young people often bear the brunt of development injustice, and we've seen this in the industrialized world, in countries undergoing the grip of a financial crisis and austerity. In Spain, for example, a country where we've worked a lot, child poverty rates have shot up in the context of the economic crisis there. And youth unemployment rates are near 60%. So these issues have to be on the post-2015 development agenda, and development must be understood as an issue affecting all countries universally, wealthier countries as well as poorer ones. Thank you, Ahmad. Let me now call on Jane Stewart. Jane Stewart is the Special Representative to the UN and Director of the International Labour Organization's Office for the UN. That sounds like a mouthful. Maybe I read that wrong, but she's the Special Representative of the ILO to the UN. Jane is a former Canadian politician who was first elected to Parliament in 1993 and has held a number of ministerial level positions in her 10 years of elected office. At the ILO, she previously served as director of the Skills and Employability Department, and subsequently as acting executive director of ILO's employment sector, working on issues of full employment, fair globalization, and decent work. So Jane is going to speak to us from that perspective of rights at work and decent work, progress and challenges and ideas going forward.
And very happy to do so, Ignacio. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, delegates. It's really a pleasure to have been asked to join this wonderful panel and to share some ideas with you. But it's wise for me to recall, mostly for myself, but also for you, that the International Labour Organization is a tripartite organization. So the actors in the real economy, representatives of employers and workers, are full members of the International Labour Organization along with governments. Now here, they're considered representatives of civil society, happy to be so, and they will probably make the case for the points that I'm making much better than I can, so I'll be careful as I make reference to the things that we feel are progressive and those where we have still opportunities. Like others, I think that this intergovernmental process has been, let's say, if not a sea change, a step change in recognizing and being willing to engage a multi-stakeholder process. And I think we have to thank the member states for that. The challenge will be, as others have said, to keep that engagement up. As far as the content of the Open Working Group's document, it won't surprise you, we concentrate on the elements of decent work. But it's not just the ILO that think decent work needs to be a major part of the post-2015 agenda. It is we the people. And one of the outreach and engagement strategies of this process, of course, have been these global surveys. The My World 2015 survey and the Gallup World Survey, where, at least in the latter, the desire for better work opportunities was the #1 global priority. And in the My World, better job opportunities was amongst the top 3. People don't want handouts. They want the opportunity to earn for themselves, to care for their families, to help build strong societies and communities, and that's their right. That's their right. Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it's not surprising that if we're trying to build an agenda for we the people, the importance of work has to be clearly articulated. Now, from the perspective of the International Labour Organization, we, not surprisingly, think that a special sustainable development goal should be recognized for decent work. But we do see in SDG 8 a very interesting articulation that member states have come up with. And it has great promise. We think that there is real opportunity in the way they've formulated it. I'll read it for you again. Promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. So member states have recognized to have work, to increase job opportunities, we need economic growth. But they also know economic growth does not automatically lead to jobs. You know about jobless, growth. So they've linked them together in a very, I'll say, transformative way. It's certainly not a new idea, but in the last 20 years it's considered a new idea that you want economic growth for something, in this case, for jobs. But the language is even more transformative than that, because it's not just any economic growth, it's inclusive, sustainable, and sustained economic growth, not just for any job, but for decent jobs. Jobs that give we the people our rights, that are freely chosen, fairly remunerated, undertaken in safe conditions, and where we as employers and employees have got a voice. So this is progress because, as Ignacio said, in the MDGs, it was only as an afterthought that we had a reflection of the importance of work. And even then, it wasn't in a very and fully comprehensive construct. Now, within the targets under SDG 8, we see particular reference, as Ahmed said, to the importance of young people, and a reference to NEETs, young people who are not in employment, education, or training. We see reference, as Marianne had stated, to persons with disabilities. We know that migrants, particularly those who are migrating for economic reasons, have special needs, and there is a target that references their requirements. There is a very clear statement that we have got to eliminate child labor and forced labor. We see in the document a recognition that we must have equal pay for work of equal value, no matter who's doing that work. So these are real advancements when we consider it versus the MDG document. In terms of the challenges, and there's so much more that can be said, but in terms of the challenges, I think one of the things I want to focus on is the issue of economic equality. And we see, and this is very much due to the work of the NGO community here, under the first goal on poverty eradication, the importance of social protection and social protection floors. It is these labor market institutions that really can provide income equality. So we start moving from just equality of opportunity that's often provided through education to looking at income equality. And labor market institutions, full employment, social protection including pensions, unemployment insurance, opportunities for families to have benefits and health insurance are critically important there, and minimum wages. These are the kinds of things that we want to see in this modern agenda because they will help us with this issue of income inequality. And the second challenge, as we've all talked about, is the issue of participation. A transformational agenda needs transformational institutions. And we believe that the hallmark of 21st century institutions will be those that learn how to engage in a meaningful fashion, a multi-stakeholder dialogue. These are things that I think we have got to focus on. And coming to Violet's point about the grassroots, not only in the construction of the global goals, but when we come to the questions of implementation at the national and local levels, we have got to have inclusive institutions. So how do we deal with that? Capacity, 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 capacity. And we know at the International Labour Organization, being what we, more inclusive in our governance structures than really any other UN entity, how difficult it is to take the global decisions and have them effectively implemented at the national and local level. We know we have to have an engaged partnership to create the goals, and we also know we have to have an engaged partnership to implement the goals and to accelerate real progress. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about. And I guess I want to conclude on two points, if you'll just bear with me. One, it struck me when Marianne was using the language of those two important words, for all. You would think that that would be enough when we say decent work for all, social protection floors for all. But then we go on and we see the additions of lists of very often disadvantaged groups. And you wonder, well, is that a negative thing? Because what if we leave somebody out? Or is the message really there, Marianne's point, if we're not seen, we're not included? And we've got to get beyond that for sure. But as a former politician making policy, I think one of the things that is advantageous when you actually see disabled people, youth, older persons, migrants, indigenous people, is we've got to remember when we're making policy that instead of writing sort of broad policy and then afterthought, sometimes 10 or 15 years after, remembering we've got to provide special measures so that there's equal outcomes for all people, that maybe that's what you're trying to do when we list here. And the second thing that comes to mind is we talk about this, what if this is the high water mark? And we hear member states say, well, we want to winnow it down, we want it finer, it's got to be impactful, we're going to have too many things. Maybe I'm wrong to suggest this, but it makes me wonder if maybe that strategy, the MDG strategy of branding and tight and selling and is a 20th century idea. And the 21st century idea is that by golly, we can be complex because development is complex. And we can use technology to help us manage the complexities and make sure we have broad engagement and that we have strong and effective monitoring and outcome mechanisms that will help accelerate us. It's just an idea. But I do really wonder if the right solution in the 21st century is to winnow it down. And if we aren't better able, thanks to our understanding and our realization that it may be harder to have a broad engagement at the first part, harder and take longer. But by golly, once everybody's involved, when it comes to implementation, it goes much more clearly and much more quickly. So just some ideas for the conversation to follow. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jane. Great ideas there, and thank you for encouraging us to embrace complexity and to safeguard against what is a very pull push by many member states and others around this process to simplify, to reduce, to filter. And that gatekeeping function, who will make those decisions about what gets filtered out, is something, again, that we have to be very vigilant about. I want to also thank you for naming the issue of economic inequality. I think one of the biggest sea changes, and I think it is a sea change rather than a step change, is the inclusion and naming of goals and targets around economic inequality. Really the issue of our time and applicable in every country across the globe, with provisions and commitments to the policy changes needed to reduce inequality, such as decent work, wage protections, progressive fiscal policies, social protection. That's in there. That's in the language. Again, something that is hanging in the balance perhaps, but it's in there. So thank you for highlighting those positives. I'm going to turn now to Dan Foster, who is Senior Counsel on the staff of Lawyers Without Borders, which is an NGO that conducts programming on the rule of law. Dan has served as Program Director for several Lawyers Without Borders programs in Africa and in Latin America. And these programs have addressed a broad array of issues such as gender-based violence, official corruption, electoral violence, and trafficking in persons. So Dan, from a rule of law perspective, what do you see as the advances, the challenges, and ideas for addressing those concerns?
Well, thank you, Ignacio. The rule of law is, among other things, sort of the gap between what the law says on paper and what it means in practice. When you have a gap of that kind, then you have, to some extent, the absence of the rule of law. And this is particularly relevant in a couple of areas relevant to our conversation today. In the past 15 years, laws regarding equality worldwide have undergone some overall trends that are very positive. And one example would be equality of inheritance and succession rights between men and women. Our first speaker, Violet, mentioned the importance of the rights of women to own and use property, and the overall trend in that area has been positive, as I said. Very many countries now, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, there are more and more countries in which, on paper, everyone has equal rights to inherit and use land. But as the law has improved in its theoretical equality, the gap between the law and reality, the law as written and reality, has also increased. And that's primarily a problem, I think, of access to justice as well as deeply rooted social conventions. There are a lot of places in which you can go to, maybe a rural area outside of a capital in a developing country, to a courthouse, and on many days you will not see a judge there, but there's a good chance that you will find someone resting or sleeping on a bench in the courtroom waiting for the judge to come back. And that'll be someone, in my experience, almost always a woman, but somebody who has walked at least a day to get to court and is now trying to wait till whenever it is the judge may return, and that's often just a rumor. This is particularly a problem for women because obviously if a father or a husband dies, somebody has gained control of that land. And it's done according to what the community expects is the norm, and sometimes somebody who's more powerful and can simply grab the land by force. So it's most often going to be women who need intervention of a court in order to enforce their rights. when you don't have a court nearby, or you have a judge who is not actually familiar with the law, as can happen in some places outside of capitals and in rural areas, where the judge is perhaps more like a justice of the peace, may not have a formal legal education, although that's less and less the case. You need to have actual access to that court in order to vindicate your rights, first of all. And the second thing you need is a court system that will in fact vindicate them and apply the rule of law, rather than doing something else that it simply thinks is reasonable or based on personal connections or something like this. So there have been, with notable exceptions, there have been a number of very positive overall legislative trends in the past 10 to 15 years. But as long as individuals are not able to capitalize on those trends and enforce the rights that have been given to them in a distant capital by legislators, then we don't have true justice and we don't have the rule of law. Now, I will say that we talk about the rule of law, and I'm referring here only to my own organization because I don't have a broader constituency. It's one area of focus. It's one perspective that one can have. If you go to a community very different from the community that legislators live in, a rural agricultural community, and you want to change the way land is inherited, you're going to have an impact on that community. We may as well accept that there may be positive and negative outcomes as a result of that if we're focusing on individual rights rather than on the community. For example, in some cases people will say, well, we can't let our sisters or daughters inherit this land because we own individual plots according to pieces of paper in a courthouse somewhere, but in practice we manage collectively, rotate crops and this sort of thing. And if you let women control it, well, they'll marry somebody outside the family, outside the clan, and then that individual will come in and start and own a piece of this land and be disruptive. And in this very beautiful conference room in New York, we can say, well, that's not always going to happen. Women don't have to get married. The wife could be the one controlling the farm, and so on. But I do think we need to recognize that if we were taking a principle like a statute that's been enacted somewhere and enforcing it on somewhere where the culture is deeply rooted against it, that we may be causing some kind of disruption. Now, if you are a firm believer in the rule of law, and that's your primary perspective, then you can say, yeah, that's what we're here for. We're here to make change. But I do want to acknowledge the importance of recognizing that making some of these progress in some ways will have some kind of effect, and we should be aware of that, of what that's likely to be in the different communities that we try to bring about change in. But I do think the rule of law and, in particular, access to justice is something that's fundamental to achieving equality and to anyone enforcing and vindicating their rights as written in Millennium Development Goals, in treaties, and, of course, in statutes.
Thank you, Dan. Access to justice and the inclusion of access to justice and rule of law currently under draft goal 16 is another major sea change, something that was very contested in the final open working group session, but there's strong language there. I think your remarks are encouraging us to also be aware of the gap between legal provision on paper and actual access to justice in practice. And I think that's something that perhaps in terms of the language of that goal and how that's refined, that reality perhaps needs to be better addressed. So finally, I'm going to ask Anna Porter to share his views on the issues that we've just been discussing of human rights and equality, the progress that's been made, and what the government of what the Netherlands sees as the main challenges going forward. Anna is Second Secretary at the Permanent Mission of the Netherlands to the UN here in New York.
Thank you very much, Ignacio, and a true pleasure to be here today. I'm very aware that I represent the technocrat level that makes sordid deals, including in the Open Working Group. But as an Open Working Group survivor, I also represent youth participation in the process. So I hope the two at least balance each other. I've worked on the Dutch position on post-2015 for over 2 years now. I've coordinated our position on post-2015 from The Hague and have just moved here to New York. And throughout the process, including in the Open Working Group, my interactions with stakeholder groups of a wide variety have always been very enriching, and for us, at least from the Dutch perspective, it's been a crucial part of our policy making as well. A process, I would say almost a dialectic process in which we have been kept sharp, focused on some crucial issues which we may have otherwise missed out on. So I want to stress that, and that is also why it's a real pleasure to be here today. And I look forward, having just moved to New York, also to work with many of you here as the post-2015 process moves forward. Now, when I arrived to this room, Ignacio informed me that I would also be the respondent to this wide variety and very rich debate so far. So going through my notes, I noticed that I could combine my task of being a respondent with my task as a government representative quite well. So that's what I'll proceed to do now. For us, and as has been emerging in this discussion as well, the key question, leaving no one behind, the essential point is how do we address inequalities in the post-2015 agenda? So the key, as has been stressed by all speakers before me, is inclusion and the related human rights principle of non-discrimination. So how does that translate to the post-2015 framework and the process? I myself distill 4 key points, and 3 relate to the structure of the framework, and the final one relates to the process itself. The 3 structural points concern the goals and targets, the what. Secondly, the means of implementation, the how, if you will. And finally, thirdly, the monitoring and accountability mechanism that we need. And the challenge ahead of us will be to make sure that all these 3 constituent parts of the post-2015 framework are inclusive. So to start with the goals and the targets, I think all 5 speakers before me have outlined the various ways in which to make the goals and targets inclusive exceedingly well, from their own particular topical perspectives and priorities. So to make a general point, political visibility is crucial in post-2015. And what I mean by that, tangibly, is the goal level. So from our perspective, we need, when tackling inequalities, we need a goal on gender equality and women's empowerment. We are quite happy with the goal that has emerged on inequalities. We were one of the countries that advocated throughout the process for what has emerged as Goal 16, but I would also like to note here that in fact we've consistently asked for 2 goals, one on peaceful and inclusive societies and another one on good governance and accessible and effective institutions. The issue of the rights issue, especially of course at the target level, has been mentioned by Ms. Shivutse. Land rights, crucial issue indeed. SRHR, as was pointed out in the introduction by Ignacio. These are issues that need to be reflected in the framework. I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Ms. Diamond who noted the importance of data disaggregation and making sure progress against targets is monitored through disaggregated data. And the Open Working Group has made a beginning with that by stipulating that data and progress should be measured and disaggregated by income, gender, age, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, and geographic location. So that also is a key way to make progress visible, and of course the lack of progress visible, and that will help sort of bring to the forefront where we're falling short. A couple of essential targets that relate to inequalities, also as has been pointed out by Ms. Stewart, relate to income inequality. We're very glad that made it into the open working document. That was also not an easy thing to realize. It was, but it's also, in fact, in academic discourse. Think of Thomas Piketty, but also looking at a recent IMF report showing how income inequality actually damages economic growth. That's a crucial issue to address. One final point on the goals and targets. The universal access targets are very helpful to address inequalities as well. Moving on to the second structural part of the framework, namely the means of implementation. That is another way of making, or that's another place where we need to make post-2015 inclusive. Post-2015 cannot be a success without the inclusion of all stakeholders, both as contributors as well as owners of the agenda. So we really need to think in terms of partnerships when carrying out this agenda. And I imagine the year ahead of us will be crucial in hammering out that in a more detailed way to make sure, because we have a relatively good set of goals and targets, but we really need to work more on that implementation part, on the partnerships that we need to forge to carry this agenda forward. Thirdly, on the structure, the monitoring framework also needs a lot more work, and that also is a crucial part to make that we need to make sure that becomes inclusive and ensure that those responsible for the implementation of the agenda are accountable to the people that the agenda is meant to serve. I think Ms. Shivutse also noted this very eloquently. And of course here there's a crucial role for our civil society partners. Finally, regarding the process, it is evident that the only way to make sure that we actually reach an inclusive post-2015 framework is by making the process inclusive, by engaging in these types of debates, but very importantly also in the formal process. And I agree with the previous speakers that the Open Working Group was a relatively good example of that. I also take to heart the caveat or the warning that this may be a high watermark. Let's try and work together to make sure that, so to speak, the second half of the post-2015 process is as inclusive as the first half. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. I didn't mean to imply that only member states are capable of sordid trade-offs. Sadly, civil society organizations and individuals that work for them are just as capable of such actions. And it's good to have you here. I think probably one of the few member state representatives. Can I ask if there are any others in the room? Put your hand up if you're from a mission. Can I ask which one? Norway. So there are certain member states who demonstrate genuine willingness to dialogue with civil society and to champion the issues of human rights and equality in a very meaningful and genuine way. And Anna has just outlined in terms of SDG content, means of implementation, and monitoring and accountability, some of the issues that are of concern to the Netherlands. And I think there's a great correspondence with and resonance with the positions that are being pushed by many civil society organizations. So thank you for sharing those ideas. So we have about 20 minutes left before the end of the session, and you've been listening very patiently. I hope that in rapt attention. But now is a chance for you to share your ideas on the issues that we've been discussing here. Please keep them on point. You can make comments. They don't have to be questions to the panelists, but please be on point. In other words, help us to tease out where we should go next in terms of bolstering the commitments to human rights and equality in the next agenda. I would ask you, when I ask you to speak, please say your name and the organization that you, or network or whatever that you represent. I'm going to take a number of questions and cluster them, and that, because I think we'll only have the chance to do one round probably of responses from our panel members. Okay, forgive me if I'm not very fair in how I identify you. It's always difficult when you see a mass of hands going up. Okay, the lady standing up with the white shirt over there. Actually, let me pinpoint a number. So if you want to ask a question, put your hand up. So white shirt standing up. You there, yes, that's just twiddled. And then you in the front. The gentleman over there, and then the lady there, yes, and then you with the glasses, I think. My eyesight's terrible. Yes. I've been very skewed towards that side. Okay, we're not going to remember the order anyway, so let me just deal with those and then I'll come over here, okay? Is that a deal? Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello? Hi. My name is Daniela Kivu, and I represent the National Council of Women of Canada. I am a convener for Global Affairs. We said no one left behind, and yet I have not heard female genital mutilation. I have not heard early child marriage. I have not heard rape being used as a weapon of war against women. I have not heard Iraq. I have not heard Syria. I have not heard South Sudan. It's a pity. We are not talking about women's peace and security. We are not talking about women's involvement in politics and how much difference a woman, or many, can do in the peace process. As a woman, as a mother, as a Canadian, am I happy with my government? To a certain extent, yes. They have initiated a program in early child marriage to end that. Kudos, Canada. And and they have financially participated to the conflict in Central African Republic, a country I did not mention, Syria, and I assume Iraq. That's all good. Yet, member states can still make a bigger difference between conflict and civil society. We need to be fully engaged. That means that our government has to engage us in this process of decision-making and peace. How can we say no one is left behind if we are playing politically correct and issues I have just mentioned seem to be invisible? We look on the other side. Anyone has an answer? Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. I should stress I'm going to have to put a cap of a minute on interventions. Otherwise, if I let one person speak for longer, it means somebody else won't be able to share their point of view. So if you can remember who was next. Yes, I think it was Mr. Maroon shirt. Yep.
Hello. Hi. My name is Omer Paul. Okay. Hi. Sorry for that. My name is Omer Paul. I'm with the Unitarian Universalist United Nations office, and I'm also the U.S. representative of the Youth Advocacy Network of Pakistan. So just a broad question for the panel. Jane Stewart referenced the list of disadvantaged, or often as we hear it, marginalized and vulnerable populations, and I agree to an extent that inevitably what happens when we try to construct that list, we naturally leave group or demographic out. But during my time here, I've deliberated extensively on inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity rights into the SDGs and other processes of the post-2015 development agenda. So my advocacy is not for a group of people, but for inherent characteristics that are exhibited by all groups of people, and those characteristics are SOGI rights. Everyone has a sexual orientation and gender identity, but it is often too often the case that those who affiliate with an LGBTQ SOGI, sexual orientation or gender identities, are often subject to discrimination, violence, and even death. And Dan Foster made reference to access to justice and rule of law, but these law institutions meant to provide justice do little to prevent this violence and discrimination if they do not outrightly condone said violence and discrimination. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights seems to be grossly ignored by some member states with impunity, and though many, if not all, member states are signatories on it, this declaration does not leave anyone behind. But because of the ambiguity of this term, marginalized, and this phrase, vulnerable populations, more often than not, those with LGBTQ sexual orientations and gender identities are left behind. So my question is then, where is member state accountability in this regard?
Thanks for that question. The fact that I'm capping you to a minute doesn't mean you have to speak at 200 miles an hour. but the point was well taken. So the question is around, discrimination on sexual orientation and gender identity. Where is that in this process? I guess. Okay, next question. Yes, I think it was you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hi, my name is Lisa, and I'm from an NGO which is actually working with young people on model United Nations conferences. And what I'm asking is, well, it is good that that there are possibilities for young people to learn, that there are institutions which encourage them to learn. But the really essential part is how do we get people to participate in those, especially those from strata which are not usually the ones participating in those projects, and how do we get people to, well, actually use the information or the knowledge they gathered there, use it actively and politically so that they can really participate, which is one of the most important things if we really want those sustainable goals to, well, be achieved.
The order was the gentleman there, then the person in the middle, and then you with the glasses. Yes. So you first, yeah.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Actually, I am from Nepal. This is Amrit Vishwakarma, and I'm participating in Janautthan Pratishthan, working for Dalit and human rights sectors, and also participating in the loose network of Durban Review Conference Follow-up Committee. Actually, I want to draw the attention regarding the issues of caste-based discrimination and untouchability. In Nepal, 20% population is still they are facing problems of the untouchability. It's called Dalit issues. And even we talk about the South Asia regions, 260, above 260 million people, they are facing even problems of the untouchability who are treated as a Dalit community and inhuman practices. So how we can address these issues through this forum regarding the issues of Dalit and untouchability, basically caste-based discriminations issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was, yes? Okay, yeah. No, I'm sorry. Yes, I couldn't see you. Yeah, you first, and then you. Yeah. Can you put your hand up again, the person who's about to speak?
It's on. Okay, hello, I am Bayne Shasrat, and I am an Ethiopian. And my question is on the human rights. We all know there is no human rights unless we have peace and security in every nation in the world. When we know journalists are arrested and languishing in jail, where is the human rights? That violates the right of the people for information. We all know that. So that's not mentioned, the languishing in prison of journalists. Number 2 question, it's a fold. When the gentleman from the Netherlands mentioned about during the implementation, you did mention member states' ownership of the agenda. And then the partners of member states. Would you please elaborate the ownership of agenda by member states? So that is a very challenging question to me to present to you, but I need some answer.
Okay.
And I will address the first question to the lawyer, please.
Okay, thank you. I've let you make 2 questions, but please, others, don't cram 2 questions into 1 slot. Next person, yes, you. Now you don't want to ask a question? Yes.
I'm Eva Richter from the International Federation of Business and Professional Women, and I would like to thank the panel very, very much for convening this extraordinarily important meeting. I think that we have, in fact, been involved in a very, very amazing process for the last 18 months, and even though it's true that we have left out certain things, that we have left out certain people, and that is very, very important. Nevertheless, it's been an absolutely amazingly inclusive and comprehensive project. Now, our problem is, how do we as NGOs prevent the erosion of everything we have so carefully worked on and produced by the member states when they come to their considerations? What do we do?
Okay, I'm just going to check in with my panelists here. Are you okay if I just take a few more questions, particularly from this side of the room or from up there, and then we just do 1 wrap-up, because we're not going to have time for anything else. Okay? Good. And you don't have to all answer everything. So, gentlemen here, red arm there. Then you, then you, then you. Okay? And are there any questions from up in the gallery? There's 1 there. Okay, we'll come to you. Great. So, I think this gentleman and then red arm.
My name is Liaquat. I'm representing Youth Action Pakistan. It's a youth-based organization to empowering young people to participate in decision-making process. I have 2 quick contribution or remarks or questions to this. Because when we're talking about the human rights, in new era, what we are looking for as human rights is also consider the grassroots democracy, and the governance is also the human rights issue. Because the most of the problem that we face in real world basically is linked with the bad governance and non-democratic values existing in our society, and that create all the problem. So that's I want to be contribute and shown in our document. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've just been told that we cannot extend, so I'm going to ask people to make their comments in 15 seconds. I'm sorry, but we won't have time to come back to the panel unless we do. Red arm. So the lady with the in red over there.
Yes.
Is it me?
Yes.
Yeah. My question is going to be, if we really want to use this concept of doing things in the 21st century, then we really have to look into equal distribution of wealth. So my question is, what is in the document which is suggesting how we are going to finance the implementation of these goals? What are the changes which really need to be effected at the global financial architectural level to make the resources available to achieve these goals?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question over here. Okay, you.
Very much. My question is, when we talk of data collection, inclusivity and participation, exactly what strategies are going to be used in order for the communities like Violet being catered for? I'm also from Sheikh Dollars International. My name is Rose Mologwani, and my question is referred to the ILO, to the lawyer, and to the guy from Netherlands. What is your contribution towards advocating that the communities should be included inclusively and not just told to do something but not being part?
Thank you. I think we have two more questions, and then I'm going to come to the panel because otherwise we won't have time. So there, and there was a question in the gallery.
To Ms. Stewart and Mr. Foster. Ms. Diamond said, if you're not named, you're not counted. And so one group that I haven't heard is the group of economic migrants, which are foreign temporary workers. And under the rule of law, they're practically stateless. So what protection do they have?
Okay, and the gallery. Can you put your hand up, the person from the gallery that wanted? Do you have a microphone?
Yes, I'm with the International Presentation Association, and my question also has to do with the economic migrants and the refugees at this point in our world. Where is their space?
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to my panelists to have to ask you to respond in under a minute to whichever question. Not all the questions will get answered, but it was important for people to air their views. But just respond to whichever question you feel is most pressing for you.
Economic migrants, I'd refer you to 8.8 as a target. You'll also see reference in terms of, if I'm right, under Goal 16, but the energy that was put around migration in the latter part of the discussions was increasing, and I think there is a recognition we have to focus on migrants. Data, communities included. It comes back to experience we've had at the ILO, and I'll say it again. It's capacity, 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 and accepting that we are not going to get the right solutions and the right implementation without that engagement. And so we have to, as a means of implementation, have monies available for capacity building. And the third thing, the question on how do we pay for this, couldn't agree more. We have got to focus on domestic resources and effective taxation. We've got to focus on making sure we close loopholes for the international movement of monies. There are many things that the member states are actually focusing on in the expert group on financing, and we'll have the opportunity in Ethiopia in July to talk more about it.
Thank you. Marianne.
Thank you. I think a lot of the points raised I would share, and the views, and found them very useful and interesting. With the finances, I would just like to say we need to be part of those conversations. Civil society needs to be part of the discussions. It is a global response. It's not just an agenda for the developing world. It's a responsibility of all of us. And I think Jane responded to some very well. But if we're going to make sure there's no one left behind, we all need to be there. Thank you. I'll leave it.
Thank you. Dan.
Thank you. In response to the lady in the front here, I think that we probably need some sort of additional instrument relating to the rights of the migrant workers you're talking about. The most pertinent ones now are the Palermo protocols, which are refer to trafficking in persons and migrant smuggling, where the migrant is treated as a victim, even though in migrant smuggling the person is also committing a crime. So I would agree that we need some new norms in that area to protect these other folks as well.
Anna?
Thank you, and thank you for all the questions. I'll make 3 points. One general point on many of the human rights issues, FGM, for example, also women, peace and security, that are not explicitly mentioned in the Open Working Group document. Many of them are in fact implicitly included in the targets, but we also have to be open in saying some of the issues were raised by countries like ours, but did not make it. Secondly, there was a question on the means of implementation and inclusiveness by the lady from Ethiopia, I believe. Just to clarify what I said is that post-2015 cannot be a success if we do not include all stakeholders, both as contributors and owners of the agenda. So we need partnerships between all relevant actors. Thirdly, regarding what we as the Netherlands are doing on inclusiveness, there was a question on that as well, but I no longer see the person that asked the question. I'll nonetheless respond. 2 points. In our policy-making process, we engage in with all stakeholders, and that includes our post-2015 policy-making process. Secondly, a very specific example, for example, in the upcoming ministerial week of ANGA, together with Ahmad, we're organizing a major event, also together with our Prime Minister, to engage young people in discussions on post-2015. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Ahmed.
Well, thank you. Just in the issue of complexity and whether we should make it a bit simpler, I like this. Do you know the story about Einstein when he was asked by his brother to make a bit of his writings a little bit simpler? So he received this letter. So Einstein wrote back to his brother asking him, well, brother, I don't promise you. I'll try to make it as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think that's very much right about the post-2015 development agenda. It's as complicated as it should be sometimes. And maybe the communication part should make it a little bit simpler. Just one piece of like simple observation and advice. I think we have to keep in mind that there's a major shift is happening now between all the consultation and the debate and what's going to happen next year. We are moving, as I call it, from international development debate to international relations negotiations. So bear that in mind. Thank you.
I've been told we need to close the meeting, so I don't want to do so without letting Violet have her 30 seconds.
Okay, I think for me, I would address the concern people have around accountability. Who is going to be responsible to ensure that the goals are going to be realistic? For me, I would say we cannot have goals that do not have goalkeepers. And the goalkeepers in this case should be the communities and the poor people that the goals are targeted to improving their lives. So, and the last thing that I want to say is we are going to a session where the grassroots are going to have a speak out. It is in language room 4 at 4:45. It's almost starting. So if you come there, you are going to hear what grassroots women are putting as priorities in these goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. I want to thank all our panelists for sharing such specific and meaningful ideas and proposals around the issues of inclusion, human rights, engagement, and thank you all for, I'm sorry about the limited opportunity for debate at the end, but thank you for your attention. Please, one round of applause for the panelists.